We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to
Put
see.
your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
Shorts 31, erect out.
Don't go! Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. Even though it's a nationwide series, listen, when you're involved as high up in the NYPD as tonight's guest was, you kind of deal with nationwide tactics. You talk to police departments all over the country, you liaison sometimes all over the world. So I thought it'd be fitting to put that under the Beat banner. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this episode 366 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And we're going to be talking tonight with NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor, who I'll introduce momentarily. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, which was a fun one to record, that was episode 365, which I was able to do with former FBI special agent as part of the Beat, Joe Valacat. Joe Valacat for a long time was not only a special agent in the Bureau, but he was also, of course, a member of the FBI New York office as a spokesman from 1981 until his retirement in 2005, worked for WNBC for a while. So he was definitely a fun person to chat with, as tonight's guest will be. By now, you know the deal. If you have any questions, fire away in the chat. I'll highlight them at the appropriate time. And of course, for those of you that may want to contribute to the super chat as well, you're more than welcome to do that. Before we begin, as always, a word from Billy Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Hopefully, I should be having some new sponsors added to the program pretty soon. I've been working diligently behind the scenes on that. So looking forward to getting more ads and incorporating into the program to keep Billy company. Billy's been loyal, and he's been my ride or die sponsorship-wise. So it's about time we add some company to the Ryan Investigative Group mix. And I see Billy in the chat already. Hello to John Costello, as well as John Latanzio, retired emergency service unit officer out of Truck 3 in the Bronx, vacationing currently in Italy. So he's watching me internationally. And for that, John, I say enjoy your vacation. Thank you very much. My next guest is a 35-year veteran of the NYPD whose career spanned patrol, investigations, internal affairs, and executive leadership. From his time walking a beat in Hell's Kitchen to overseeing youth strategies and social media investigations citywide, he combined frontline experience with forward-thinking innovation. Rising through the ranks to become an assistant commissioner in the New York City Police Department, he played a key role in shaping how the NYPD connects with young people and the community it serves. And that, of course, is for this episode 366 of the Mike the New Haven podcast, is retired NYPD Assistant Commissioner, the aforementioned Kevin O'Connor. Welcome. How are you, sir?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Was very much looking forward to having you on. A lot of people, particularly on LinkedIn, when I put out the promo, mentioning you were coming on. We're very excited about that. So we'll be having a lot of people, I'm sure, in the chat tonight. But as I ask every guest before we get into, your career and where you worked and things you accomplished, where did you grow up, and did you always know you wanted to be a cop?
So majority of my childhood was in Middle Village, Queens. Didn't want to be a cop. My dad was a cop. He was a police officer in the 13th. I'm actually fourth generation NYPD. My son is actually fifth generation NYPD. So it took me until I retired to find out the exact date my family got on the job. And it was my great uncle, William Kerwin, who got on June 25th, 1913.
Wow.
And we've been running consecutively since. So very proud of the legacy my family has in the NYPD, and it's continuing today.
As you should be. And you mentioned the 13th precinct. That warms my heart because your father worked right next door to my friends over in Truck One, the emergency service unit. So that precinct is near and dear to me for that reason. And hello to everybody from Truck One who may be tuning in tonight, especially my buddy Greg Welch. So you mentioned you didn't want to be a cop. Before I get to you eventually taking a test and getting on the job, what did you originally want to do?
So I wound up going to college. I went to Manhattan College in the Bronx, and I was studying to be an electrical engineer. Loved maths, loved science, but police work wasn't something that just jumped off the page. When I was 16, my father said, "You're taking the test." So I took the test along with 60,000 other people. A lot of people took that test. It was, I still remember the list. It was 4061 was my list.
Wow.
And I was too young to take the job when I got called the first time. I was too young to take the job the second time. And it was 1987 when the stock market crashed. Not like we see it today, up, down, left, right. This was the real crash of 87. I was going into my junior year, and I got a call from the police department that this would be the only last chance, my third chance, to get in off that list. Otherwise, I'd have to take the test again. Now, I only turned 20 in 1987, so I'm giving up my age. And they said, don't worry about that. If you want to go in, we're putting a January class in. So I realized that with the market crashing, my cousin was only one of 6 female engineering students in Manhattan College, and she was running a 4.0 and got one job offer on 200 resumes submitted.
Wow.
So I was in big trouble. So I said, maybe Dad was right. Maybe I'll try plan B. I can always go back to school. So I took the chance, and I wound up going into the police department in January of 88. I was 20 years, 5 months old when I got in. So I wasn't even 21. So my father said, it's kind of weird because technically you're supposed to be 21 to have a license to have a gun. So he said to me, something's up. The police department doesn't do anything for anybody. So his pessimism came out, and he was a delegate for many years in the 13th.
Right.
So he knew the ins and outs. So I got into the class, and sure enough, he was right. When I got out, I got assigned to Midtown, and they had back then the Mayor's Midtown Enforcement Unit. It was a multi-agency unit. And sure enough, there was 6 of us that weren't 21 yet. So guess what we were doing? Underage drinking operations. So we could legally walk around carrying guns, but we weren't legally allowed to drink. And that's why they were willing to accept us. They immediately off the bat used us for 2-3 months, depending on when your birthday was, to do underage drinking in Midtown, which was a very different place back then. I mean, the time was called the Deuce. It was nothing like you see today. And a lot of people can't even fathom what it was like back then.
You see videos, and the great thing about the internet is that it's time capsule. So you go on YouTube or whatnot, or even just on Instagram, and people have videos of late 80s, early 90s Times Square. You see X-rated theaters. You see, people, ladies of the night, shall we say, walking around. And it was, listen, that's just how it was back then. It was the status quo. So even now, when New York City is, as we'll talk about a little bit later, experiencing a little bit of a problem with crime rising up again, compare it to that age, and it's nothing. It was Disneyfied, and that would come, of course, during the Giuliani years. It's nothing like it was back then. It was the Wild Wild West back then.
And what's ironic is we were solo foot posts, rookies.
Right, yeah.
I had the front of the Port Authority from 40th to 42nd pretty steady. And there were Port Authority officers all over the place. But we were basically told, I don't want to catch you by the sergeant or the lieutenant standing with another post. That's your post. If you link up for a minute or two, that's fine on the corners, but that's your post. So, and now they work double everything. I don't think it's any more dangerous now than it was then. In fact, I think it's less. I think I learned very early on how to take care of myself, how to protect myself, how to use tactics much better than most right away, as did there were probably 45 to 50 of us in that rookie unit. Back then we called it FTU. And we turned out of Midtown South. So we were covering mostly 8th Avenue posts back then.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Port Authority, because I was going to say, the Port Authority Police does play a hand in assisting NYPD guys. There's a good working relationship there across the board, which has always been a positive. But, and I always talk about this. It doesn't matter, going through the academy pre-merger back then, which department you ended up in, whether it be transit, whether it be housing, or rather, in your case, the city, as it was referred to. There was a lot of turbulence, The city was in an uphill battle. It was a violent time to be a police officer, much like it is now, although in a different context. It was a dangerous time to be a police officer, and they were, you guys were being targeted back then for sure. And if you go, again, I always say this, if you go on the Officer Down Memorial page across the board, because since the merger of the departments in 1995, they count the housing line of duty desks as well as the transit. There's a lot of names back to back to back during that time period who were getting killed. So, being a young cop around that time, of course, you did have guidance. Even if you were alone on a post, you weren't truly alone. Just tell me about, again, and you kind of referred to it just now, learning the street, learning how to talk to people. And before Bill Bratton came along and coined verbal judo, using verbal judo when you needed it.
Yeah, so one of the differences I saw then, too, is our bosses, the sergeants. I mean, we had Jack Burton. He was a 40-year veteran. He was the lieutenant in charge, 40-year veteran running the FTU. We had 3 or 4 sergeants. I remember Sergeant Henry, who wound up becoming Lieutenant Henry. He ran the police room at 100 Center Street for many years as a lieutenant. So I always saw him when I made a collar. I'd stop in to see him. Bobby Acapelli and Tommy Ahern. These were 15, 20-year veteran sergeants that were training rookies. And it was a different time. And you really learned how to take care of yourself. And you would do the patrol car with another rookie. And these guys were a wealth of knowledge, but just watching how they did things taught you. The foot posts, one of the things my dad always stresses, and I used to tell this story to the rookies all the time. You never know who your friend is on the street. So you treat everybody with respect. There's no reason to not. The drunk, the drug addict, until you have to do what you have to do. So I remember my first gun collar was October of 1988, right in front of Port Authority. It was pouring rain. I had my dad's old, rubber raincoat on with the corduroy collar. We didn't have radio carriers on our belts. We had these giant radios. We had to use a quarter to get the battery out of the back of the radio and swap it out. They would look like a brick. So you carried the radio usually in the inside pocket of your duty jacket. So it's pouring that night, and I have the raincoat on, the radio's inside the duty jacket, and I literally came walking out of the front of the Port Authority building after taking a break. And there's this young man and his girlfriend standing there, and there's 10 guys standing in front of him. And 10 guys are facing me. I'm walking up behind the guy and the girl, and he's screaming and cursing at them. And I'm like, why aren't they killing this guy? I mean, the way he's talking to them, and didn't put 2 and 2 together, inexperienced. And I literally walk up to the side of him, come up from behind him, and he's standing there pointing a gun at the 10 guys. No time to react. Simply reached out, grabbed the top of the revolver, and held on for dear life. Now I get the gun out of his hand, and I'm standing there like an idiot, looking in my hand going, holy crap. And all of a sudden I hear everybody yelling, he went that way, he went that way. I look up, the 10 guys are gone. The girl is gone, the guy is gone. And I'm running down the side of the Port Authority, which is just a straight up brick face on 40th Street. There was nothing there. The only thing that was there was the parole building from Manhattan in the center of the block between 8th and 9th Avenue. No hotels. Now you go down, there's 3 hotels on the block. Completely desolate. It's probably 11 o'clock at night. And I'm 20 years old, best shape of my life, and I chase this kid down. I put the gun in my pocket, so I grab him from behind. I get him. He's going to roll over and let me cuff him. No. Bam, right in the face. Hits me square in the nose. Seeing stars, realize I got my gun, I got his gun. We carried revolvers back then. He's punching, I'm punching. Finally, I get to a point where I just hit him down onto the ground hard enough that he hit his head on the sidewalk, and I'm holding him. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm about to get the radio out. I get an 85 or 1013 over the radio. You hear the sirens. I'm just holding on to him until somebody gets there. I get hit over the back of the head with a 2x4 by his girlfriend. Where did she get a 2x4 in the middle of Times Square? I don't know. But we happen to be in the middle of the block, directly opposite Parole, which was closed, usually closed at 6 o'clock at night. This is 10, 11 o'clock at night. There's no one on this block at all. So at this point, I'm ready to just let him go because I got his gun. I'm in trouble. I'm bleeding from the back of the head. And all of a sudden, I see out of this desolate, dark parking lot of Parole, the kid's in trouble. It's all these drunks stumbling out from the Parole parking lot. And they chase the guy off of me just enough that the troops arrive. He runs down to 9th Avenue and heads south, not knowing he's running right towards Midtown South Precinct. And everybody's running up the avenue to 40th Street because it's only 5 blocks up. And he runs right into the cavalry. So the cops will show up. They see all these drunks. I mean, most of these guys were former vets. All they did was drink. They had a horrible drinking habit. And the whole reason I had that block is there was a liquor store on that corner. And my job was to keep them from harassing all the young women going onto the bus after work. That was the main function, is just keep the corner clear on 40th and 8th. So I used to tell them, Parole's closed, go down to Parole. And they used to say, O'Connor, if we're still there in the morning, they're going to beat the crap out of us. So I said, nobody's going to beat the crap out of you. I get off at 2 a.m. Before I leave, I'll come and wake you up and chase you out. And I said, by then, you could do whatever you want to do. These were the guys that came out and took care of me. Again, never know who your friends are. So my dad looks at me and says, so what are you going to do now? I said, what do you mean? He goes, you owe them. I said, what? He says, tomorrow, find out who was there and take them to that liquor store and buy them a bottle. So I'm figuring this is going to cost me a fortune. I find 3 or 4 guys. Hey, you okay? We heard about last night. I said, were you there? No, he was there. I was there. You're not going to make us go to court. I said, no, I'm not taking you to court. Follow me. I walk into the liquor store and I tell the guy behind the counter, whatever they want. So I'm waiting for the bill. They all pick $2 bottles of T-Bird, which is just pure rot gut. So it cost me like $6. I said, you know what? Give them 2 bottles apiece. And that was the way that story ended. But again, they saved my life that night. And from that day on, you learned, be careful when you walk up on something. You don't know what's going to be there. So
we're not even 20 minutes into the show. We already have the highlight of the show. That's the clip I'm putting out tomorrow. We're not even 20 minutes in. I already got a great highlight to put out tomorrow. So thank you. You just made my job a hell of a lot easier. We're talking with retired NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. I got to come clean. I ran the wrong intro earlier. I forgot to switch it up. I didn't mean for it to be a beat intro, but whatever. You guys get the point. The beat's coming up on Monday. I'll get to that later. And that brings us into, well, you stayed in Midtown, not the NSU, because NSUs were going away at this point into FTUs, like you said. And you spent 6 years, well, as a cop, that is, before you got promoted in Midtown North from 89 to 95. And that's really a sweet spot because, again, we talked about the city cleaning up. You were there for the worst of the worst. 1990 was the crescendo. We had over 2,000 homicides in the city. By the time you got promoted to sergeant in 1995, the city was really starting to turn around. So those 6 years they're on patrol, again, being a part of the community policing initiative that Dink had started, and Kelly in his first stint as PC continued, seeing the cleanup, dealing with kids too, which would play into your role later, as we'll talk about as assistant commissioner. Those 6 years, I imagine, were quite the education.
Yeah, and Midtown was a very unique place because if you were west of 8th Avenue, it was one community. If you were between 5th and 8th Avenue, it was the Broadway Theater, Times Square area. And then the precinct went all the way over to Lex. So you had a little different world over there. I probably spent 90% of my time in Midtown North, west of 8th Avenue, which was then called Hell's Kitchen. Now it's Clinton. It's not even Hell's Kitchen. But there was drugs everywhere. Heroin was huge on 9th Avenue. There was prostitution galore all over 11th Avenue by the UPS factory, UPS building. There was a diner down there. I mean, you had 3 different kinds of prostitutes running around. You had crackheads, you had the regular call girls, and then you had what we called the he-she's. You know, it was a different world on each block. And it was amazing. When we made a sweep one night, we made the mistake of putting 2 different blocks in the back of the paddy wagon after grabbing a whole bunch of people. And next thing you know, we had a fight in the back of the paddy wagon because we put a couple of the he-she's in the back with a couple of the regular girls, and they didn't appreciate that. So we had a little riot in the back of the paddy wagon for a little bit. But it was Hell's Kitchen was where I really loved being a cop. And I had the opportunity to pick up a post. You know, when you're 2 years on a job, you're doing all the flying and the DOAs and all the fixed post type stuff. There was a cop, Greg Mack, big man. He had jerry curls. He was dark as night. His head was gigantic. I think I have a big head, but Greg was a big man. And he had Park West High School was his post, and his 50th and between 10th and 11th. And he was going to Mounted. He got an opportunity to go to Mounted.
Uh-oh. I believe the connection froze with Commissioner O'Connor. Oh, so we lost Commissioner O'Connor temporarily. We'll wait for him to get back. In the meantime, let me say hello to all of you in the chat. Again, I mentioned John Costello, John Latanzio earlier. Okay, Commissioner's back now. Commissioner, you mentioned Greg Mack. Now, before you continue, if we're thinking of the same Greg Mack, did he have a brother named Roger who was in ESU and later the Bomb Squad? Yep, same guy.
The one and the same. Quite a pair.
Yeah.
Great guys.
Yep.
So
I know both.
Greg was a mentor to me. He was a couple of years on the job more than me. And I said, Greg, should I take this post? And he said, absolutely. He says, you're the only thing keeping half these kids from getting hurt. He says, but you got to own it. So I took it. And I was just what they called the Park West Portable at the time. And community policing, CPOP, was just really getting going. So I realized that a lot of the conditions that the school did, graphic arts or the old New York School printing, was literally a block away. On the front door was on 49th Street, but the back was on 50th. So you had about 5,000 kids traveling to the trains up on Broadway and 8th Avenue from the schools. So I talked to the CO at the time, was Charlie Doonan, Deputy Inspector Charlie Doonan. And I said, I want to carve a CPOP beat in this area because the beats that had either side didn't want to deal with the schools. So they carved a CPOP beat 49th to 51st from Broadway to 12th Avenue. And that was my beat. And it basically covered everything that the schools dealt with. I had Sacred Heart Church on 51st Street with the school. I had St. Clair's Hospital. But I also had all the conditions all the way up to Broadway. So what was nice is in the summer, I spent more time up towards the Broadway side when the schools were closed. But it was a full year type post. But 5,000 kids. And this was before Comstat. You know, Bill Bratton's merger happened a couple of years into it. The precincts had a list, the top 5 problems in the command at the time, in order. The schools were number 1 at the time because of robberies and gangs. You know, back then we were talking about the DDPs, the Dominicans Don't Play. We had Latin Kings, and then we had a group called the Decepticons, which came out of a housing development in northern Brooklyn in the 8th floor, Sand Street, York Street, that area. And they would come in and they would prey on these kids and they'd rob them, sometimes by knife point, sometimes with a hammer. So being a solo post, I relied on the sectors. And the guys that had Sector Ida was Steve O'Hagan and Johnny Rhoda. Both great guys, good team. So if I needed something, they'd hear me on the air and I'd have these guys absolutely on point every time I needed them. And what people don't understand is there was another group of people that were my backup every single day. So school safety agents in each of the schools. And this is pre NYPD taking them over. I had some great people there. The level 3s were like the sergeants of the schools, and they had probably a half a dozen to 10 agents working in each school. That's 90% of the help I needed was from them. And these are unarmed guards, and they were fantastic. They were like parents to these kids. And anytime we had a problem, they had my back. If I needed something a little bit more, the door was going to get a little hectic with some weapons. That's when the precinct would, the sector would be there. So a lot of guns in the schools. I mean, you talk about Bill Bratton. At the time, we set up a safe corridor. Worldwide Plaza was brand new at the time, where the old garden used to be. Yeah. And the condominiums they built on the 9th Avenue side Richie O'Donnell, a retired lieutenant out of Midtown South, was the head of security. He let me use the empty apartments on 9th Avenue facing west towards the school. And I used to sit up there in the morning and I'd watch some of the kids, especially when we had the random scanning. And I'd see a kid drop a gun into a garbage can. Now, you want to make sure you make a collar with it. So I'd have a school radio. I'd go down, retrieve the weapon out of the garbage can, put it over the school radio and say, code red, walking in the door, I have the gun. And they would grab this kid with no issue, no harm, nothing. And we had quite a few of those incidents, but we also had kids that were really good. You know, they'd walk up to you and they'd see you on the corner. Every day I was on 49th and 9th like a statue. They knew where to find me. And the kids would come up and say, oh, Connor, I forgot I had this on me. I work in a supermarket, you know, give me the whole spiel. Now, these kids are coming out of East New York and Bed-Stuy in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'd say, give me what you got. And they'd give me a box cutter or a knife or something. I said, you owe me. And they go, okay. And they'd be all happy because they were going to school, no problems. And just, you know, get rid of the weapon at the time. And one of those kids came back one day and says, O'Connor, there's a kid in a Chicago Bulls jacket. He's got a shotgun. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. You're talking 90s, full length, 3/4 length, Chicago Bulls down jacket. And we're looking for it. And I'm in a 3-wheel scooter. I was scooter qualified. So I used a scooter to be able to zip around the schools and get up and back to the train station. And sure enough, on 51st Street, there's the guy in the Chicago Bulls jacket with a sawed-off shotgun hanging from a shoulder strap, 16 years old. Jesus. But the kids got to trust you. And that's when I realized how that was my career path right there. The kids, I took to heart that they would get dismissal, would run out of those buildings to get to the trains before the massive crowds because they were scared to death. And it's a horrible thing to see. You know, kids shouldn't feel like that coming out of school. They should be able to go home in peace. But it was a tough time. You know, Decepticons, gangs, weapons. So I really enjoyed it. And the Hell's Kitchen community, fantastic. You know, we were the alarm clock in the morning, the 4 or 5 West Side posts. When we came out to post, you saw drug dealers leave, prostitutes would leave, the pimps would leave. Hey guys, that's it. You know, we were the clock. Time to go home. Night's over. Kids are coming out. And we would clear the West Side probably within 30 minutes. That was a different time.
And the neighborhood's changing. As you mentioned, it's Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen, at least in the early 80s, that was Westies territory. Yep. You know, and they were violent. You know, it was a predominantly Irish neighborhood with the Irish version of the mafia running it. And I remember a line from a Law and Order episode, season 1, Mike Logan and Max Greevy, where in regards to the Westies, I think it was Sergeant Greevy who was quoted as saying, they slit your throat while they do the sign of the cross. So you went from that to, as you said, a more diversified neighborhood, and sometimes not in the best of ways when you factor in the gangs. And it was a tough time. But I love the trust factor mentioned there because as someone that experienced it myself with security guards and also SROs, if the SRO does his or her job right, that's a very unique and special bond for a kid to have. And, you know, who's to say those kids weren't inspired to become cops down the road themselves because of dealing with you and the way you treated them?
And I had the building for the Westies. It was 747 10th Avenue. It was on the corner of 51st and 10th Avenue. Big apartment building.
Yep.
So when they forced all the people out of the tenement buildings, they put them in 747 10th Avenue and 690 11th Avenue, which was on 55th and 11th. And those buildings stayed vacant for years. And it was all drug infested. No windows in most of those buildings. And there was a lawsuit keeping them from ripping them down. 20 years later, they finally won the lawsuit where the city couldn't rip them down. And people bought them up for nothing, $30,000, and they're worth millions now. But I had the kids of the Westies. The Westies were taken down pretty much in the mid-'80s. So I had the kids. And the kids were trying to be their parents. And it was a really wild time. When I'm standing on the corner of 51st and 10th one day, middle of the summer, nice Friday night, the top apartment of that building, an old man had died naturally. So he was in the apartment for quite a while. The apartment stunk. So the management left the door open of the slider on the balcony. So the kids jumped off the roof onto the balcony. and they got into the apartment, and they had not full-size refrigerators, but they weren't tiny, probably about 4 feet high. They got into the apartment, and I'm standing on the corner, and there was a big marijuana trade right on the corner of 51st and 10th. They took the refrigerator and pushed it off the balcony 30 stories up right into 10th Avenue while I'm standing on the corner. And it hit nobody. How it didn't hit a car, I don't know. But it shattered everywhere. Big loud boom. Little Hispanic gentleman, probably in his 60s, walks by and goes, "Careful, that was meant for you, kid." And just keeps walking. Like, no big deal. Just keeps walking. I'm like, oh, okay. Next thing you know, they're calling death threats into the precinct. We don't have cell phones at the time. I get a call the base, 10-1. So I call the base and where are you? They sent the car out to pick me up and brought me back to the base. I'm like, what's going on? Somebody called a death threat. They're going to try to kill you because you're on. I said, it's because I'm doing my job. So I said, no, I'm not changing posts. We're the police. I said, I got a plan. Now I'm the beat officer now, maybe for 2 months. I start writing down in my memo book all the violations I see. Loud radio playing, jaywalking, every little violation I can see going on all week. The next Friday, I tell my boss, I need some help. They put a 1 and 8 in the area and a paddy wagon, and I took everybody off the corner that night, probably 20 of them, for violations. And we put them in the system, and I didn't see them till Monday. They weren't out till Monday. How that, back then, that's how it worked. Sometimes it takes you 15 hours to process them. Did it again the second week. They're all yelling, sticking up their fingers across the street at me. And then finally, one of them decides to come over, and I won't say the name, but he's the son of a Westie. And he says, "You're going to do this every weekend?" I says, "As long as it takes." And he says, "All right." I said, "When I'm out here, there's no dealing. There's a church right there, Sacred Heart. There's schools here. When I'm here, that doesn't happen. I don't care what you do any other time." And it worked. And it was pretty wild. But I had my taste at Westies. Brother Adams ran the school, and Father Nealon ran the church. And one of the Westies kept parking his flatbed tow trucks in front of the school every single night. So in the morning when the school buses came, these 2 giant tow trucks were there. He says, "Kevin, I need some help." So every day I'd write a tag on each one of them. And I said, eventually he's going to scofflaw. The head of the DOT, which also wasn't part of PD back then, was literally down the block on 11th Avenue, the office. So I went down to see him. He was a retired captain that was now working for DOT. So I said to him, "How hard is it to get a heavy tow?" He says, "What do you got?" So I tell him. He says, "Here's my personal number to this office. Call me when you need it." So that morning, I'm tagging the car. Kids are walking into school with their parents. These are old elementary school kids. And there's the guy that owns the truck. And he's cursing and yelling at me, "Go ahead, write me a ticket," calling me all sorts of names. He sees me walking back to the 3-wheel scooter. He's calling me more names in front of all these kids and parents. Brother Adams is there, and he knew what I was going to do. And he made the kids stay outside and watch. I was walking over to the scooter to grab my nightstick out of the scooter. And at the same time on the radio, and all of a sudden you hear whoop, 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 whoop coming from every direction. It's early in the morning. It's like 8 o'clock. 4 sectors show up. And he's looking at me. I go, "Now you ready to talk?" Click, click. He's cuffed. In front of all the kids, Brother Adams is using it as a learning moment. And he says, "That's why you don't talk to police officers that way." At the same time, he's sitting in the back of the RMP. 2 heavy trucks show up, tow trucks from DOT. And in front of the entire neighborhood, they towed his trucks off the block. It's great, but again, message sent. He never made it out of jail. When they found out he was picked up, it turned out there was a big major case going on with this guy. And they decided that was the time they were going to drop it.
Nice.
He was going into the Bronx, smacking a window or denting a door on high-end cars, and walking into precincts in the Bronx with fake tow sheets. It wasn't real. That he was sent there to pick up these cars. Here's the tow sheet. So if he got pulled over, he had a tow sheet in his hand signed by the precinct desk officer. So apparently he was stealing cars left and right out of the Bronx. Nobody ever saw this guy ever again. So I had the benefit that the entire neighborhood thought I got rid of this guy. All I did was write some tickets and have his trucks towed, but he never appeared again. The feds took him, and he was done. He probably flipped on a whole bunch of other people, and that was the end of the story. But it was a really wild place to work.
Oh, it was a domino effect, and I love that. I mean, back then, something like that, again, I go back to a line that the late Terry Tunnick said, and it's a shame he's not with us anymore, but he always has this quote that we remember him by. Never forget, we are the police. And that was a moment where it's like, no, wait a minute. And I love what you said earlier. This is my post. This is my block. I'm not going to let them scare me away. And that's an important principle that even now police officers should remember. That is your post. That is your sector. That is your beat. And you got to own it. And you did own it. And I think those lessons, and you also had examples in great supervisors, I'm sure even, and we don't have to get into it, you had examples in what not to do. But that molds you for what would come in 1995 and making sergeant and going to the fighting ninth. So was boss something that you had on your mind in the early days of your career? Or was that something that as time progressed, you said, you know what, let me give this a shot?
No, that was dad. Going back to dad again. So my father was a police officer for 20 years, 20 and out. Union delegate probably for 14, 15 years. Did his first year in the 4-0 in the late 60s and then wound up finishing in the mid 80s in the 13th after 19 years in the 13th. And he said, if you're going to take the job, you got to make boss. He says, at least lieutenant. His brother John was a lieutenant in the 4-0. He did 34 years on the job. So my uncle John, they called him JJ. He was 6'6", involved in a couple of shootings while he was out there, spent probably most of his career in the 4-0, and retired eventually out of the 115 in his last year. But he said, you got to make boss, because he was working 3 jobs just to survive, even back then. He had 4 kids, all close in age. We were Irish twins, a year and a half apart. I was the oldest of 4. So dad was the one who convinced me to study. So I did, and made sergeant in 1995.
And there you go. Like I said, and I feel like, again, looking back at the history of the city, not anything against your previous assignment, you had a great time there. 1995 to 1998 is probably the sweet spot in your career. You had a lot of them, as we'll talk about tonight. But that was a heck of a time to be in the East Village. The city is really turning around, and we'll get to, of course, going to the Bronx Juvenile Crime Squad in 98 in a little bit. By the time you left in 98, compared to where you were starting out in Midtown North in 89, there had to be some part of you saying, damn, man, we've really cleaned this place up.
So I saw Midtown change. It was just when the lawsuit came back, people started buying the buildings. And then when they got to the 9th, it was the same thing. The cutoff line when I got to the 9th was Avenue A. That was where you went from okay to you're crazy being east of Avenue A.
Yeah.
You're in Alphabet City, different world.
Yeah.
Even my rookie year, I was in the Tompkins Square Park riots like everybody else in Manhattan South. So I'm like, I'm going to the 9th. I'm supposed to go to the 13th. I wanted to go back to the command. My dad left because I had sentimental ties, and I wound up getting to the 9th. And it was the XO of the borough at the time was Mike Fox. Mike Fox was a cop 19 years in the 9th precinct before he made sergeant. So my cousin Maureen was the head of the Police Women Endowment Association at the time, and she was a sergeant in the 13th. So she calls him up saying, I want Kevin to come to the 13th. So next thing you know, I get a phone call, and he goes, it's Mike Fox. Kevin? I'm like, Chief? And he goes, your cousin's breaking you got to do something about it. What do you want to do? I said, weren't you a cop in the 9th? He says, best place you'll ever work. Stayed in the 9th. Best thing I ever did. It was the best house I ever worked in. Like you said, I saw the change. My first week there, Keith Prunty gets shot. I was there for 3 days. They get a job of a robbery in progress, Avenue C and East 3rd Street, a bodega. It turned out it was drug dealers robbing drug dealers, and him and his partner got caught in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And Keith gets hit in the shoulder and gets paralyzed from the waist down. Very tight house. I was also there when Scotty Kniff, who was the anti-crime sergeant at the time, got broadsided by a drunk driver coming in for the inauguration, Giuliani's, I think, second inauguration.
Yeah, New Year's Day, 98.
Yep. And it was right around the corner. It was on East 5th Street and 2nd Avenue. So very tight house. Everybody was in the hospital that night. It was amazing. Almost every cop from the 9th was at Bellevue. And Scotty wound up living quite a while, 20 years. The CO at the time was Michael Weiss, who had quite a reputation on the job. He was a tough nut, but he loved workers. He was a good boss, probably the best boss I ever worked for. and he was the 9th Precinct CO, and he kept that place together. The Precinct Club actually nominated him twice for Man of the Year because he took care of his cops. And he did that even with Scotty 20 years later. He kept it up with Keith. He kept up with Scotty. He never forgot his people. And that was what I really liked. And every event we had at the 9th, the alumni were there in droves. They were, Donnie Muldoon, who I didn't work with, famous name from the 9th. They all would come out for these events and support the cops. My cousin Billy was a cop in the 9th when my dad was in the 13th. He wound up dying in the 9th, active, died of cancer. So a lot of ties to the precinct. I ran the conditions unit, which they now call the quality of life teams. And we just did everything that, this new team would go in on 13th Street and at First Avenue, make their raids and grab the dealers and the sellers. And we would clean up to go in and get the rest of the pieces. So it was a tag team. And the guy that ran that SNU team was a guy named Jimmy Shea, Dermot Shea's brother. Jimmy wound up retiring from the job as a deputy chief.
Yeah.
So had some really good experiences. Had a great team. George Krant, Elisa Anders wound up becoming a captain. Ray Casablanca, Sean Gordon. I mean, these guys were fantastic. And we took care of the business. And it was just a really good experience. We made a difference with quality of life in the precinct. Tompkins Square Park was one of our main things. So when it would be a shooting or a serious incident, Artie Monahan, the squad commander, goes, Kevin, I need to debrief some people. So we go do quality of life enforcement, and we bring people in, and they would do their questioning and, cut them loose, and they get information. That's how we used to do it in the old days. The street was the where you got your information from, but we were a big part of that. One of the things we had about Tompkins Square Park was they had the drunks sitting on the park bench every morning. So if we'd have to go in, write some summonses, clear them out every once in a while. And there was one woman who we called the French maid. She was probably 60 years old. She wore a French maid outfit every single day that she could, if it wasn't 20 degrees. And they were always different colors.
Variety.
So we used to everybody had to throw $1 into the kitty every day and guess what color is she wearing today. And that was one of our first stops every day, was to drive through the park and see what the French maid was wearing before we went out and did some enforcement. But I loved that place so much that when I retired, that's where my walkout, my final sign out was the 9th Precinct.
Yep. And in that old 90s RMP. I saw the pictures online, the old NYPD police, blue and white ones they used in the mid-90s. And I feel like, you could, again, advancement is good, and we'll talk about that. You could probably spend the rest of your career there if you wanted to.
Easily. Again, I was still the juvenile guy. So Ovis was the XO in Midtown when I was there as the school cop. And they had just as many youth problems on the Lower East Side as they did in Midtown. So he says, I want you to do something in my youth program. So immediately I took over to 3 youth officers or 3 school cops, and we took it over and we killed it. We got rid of a lot of the problems. It wasn't a major issue anymore. We had it down pat. And a lieutenant got wind of what we did, not only what I did in Midtown, but he got wind of what I did in the 9th. He was the CO of the juvenile crime squads under Fugitive Enforcement Division. So I get a call from him asking me if I wanted a job. So I went to the CO and he said, you got to be crazy not to. You're going to the detective bureau. Take it. And next thing I know, in September of 98, I was heading up to the Bronx and took over a squad.
Which we'll transition to momentarily. I just want to go back. I'm glad you mentioned Scotty Condiff. I knew about his story. He died in 2015, 17 years after the accident. I didn't know he was a 9th Precinct guy. So thanks for bringing him up, because that was a very sad story. It was literally just after midnight on New Year's Day when that drunk broadsided him, and he hung on for quite a while, but his life was never the same after that accident. And Keith Prunty, to your point, I'm glad you mentioned him too, because again, on the heels of his shooting, you have to go back a year to 94. Sean McDonald got killed in the Bronx interrupting a robbery. Ray Cannon got killed in Brooklyn interrupting a robbery. So that was something, and besides the camaraderie of the house, that was, again, very close to home, considering the 2 line of duty deaths the year prior and the circumstances under which both Sean and Ray got killed. So I'm glad you mentioned both those guys, and what they did is not forgotten. But
and I would be remiss if I didn't bring up when I was in Midtown, and I like to thank Jerry Kane, who I always see on LinkedIn. He always
Jerry.
brings it up. Tony Dwyer was pushed off the roof of the McDonald's when I was in Midtown.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a little connection with Tony that not only with seeing him in Midtown South or in the precinct, I was a coach. I ran a CYO in my parish, which was Notre Dame, New Hyde Park at the time. And he was a coach in his neighborhood in Elmont. So a little bit of a connection there. I didn't know Tony that well, but that was a big piece of who we were in Midtown. Everybody came together with that. But I got to remember Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. His anniversary is coming up in October. And during that time, too, even though it wasn't in your command, it was over in the 13th. Tony Sanchez gets killed in 97 on the robbery. So we don't forget either of those guys. And it's good to always speak their names here in the program. I will say, even though Juvenile was your beat and you're still staying in that when you went over in 1998, the Bronx versus Manhattan, you had spent that to that point the entirety of your career in Manhattan. And I always talk about this with the FDNY guys. There's Manhattan firefighting, and there's Brooklyn firefighting, and there's Bronx firefighting. Is it kind of the same thing, at least philosophy-wise and approach-wise, borough to borough with the PD, how you do things in Manhattan is different than how you do things in the Bronx, so on and so forth?
100%. I have to say, based on my experience, I was never a Brooklyn cop, so I'm not going to criticize or say anything bad about Brooklyn.
Right.
The Bronx cops were the best cops I ever worked with in my entire career, hands down. Unbelievable. The volume of stuff they had to deal with, the violence they had to deal with, even what we're seeing going on this week up there. But back then, off the hook. And they took it in stride, and they did what they needed to do. So it was an eye-opener. I was really glad I did. I got to the squad up there. And this was like the DA squad for court counsel. And 16 to 17-year-olds were still adults at the time. But we worked right out of the family court. And we had two main functions. Enhancing juvenile delinquent arrests made by patrol and juvenile warrants. Now we average 700 to 800 warrants a year in the Bronx, my squad. I had 5 detectives. I was the baby of the squad too. I had 17, 18-year veterans in the squad. They could find anybody. This is before social media, before computers. And you got to remember, these are kids doing robberies, gunpoint, shootings, gun possessions. They would get bench warrants. They'd abscond from juvenile locations and be running around the Bronx somewhere. To find these guys was an amazing thing to see. The talent I had using post offices, superintendents, speaking to people on the blocks. We found just about anybody we needed to. I said 700 warrants. We'd clear 96% of the warrants a year. And a lot of them were knock on the door, leave a card. Mom would make sure that kid got back to court. But we were physically apprehending close to 400 kids a year. That's a lot of kids. And we did that. I did that for 4 years. Not a single kid got hurt. None of my detectives got hurt. Yeah, we had a couple of roll-arounds a couple of times, but nobody got hurt. Tactics was huge because with kids, their immediate instinct is to fight or run. That's what they did. So we were prepared for it. I was the fire escape guy, because my detectives were scared to death of fire escapes.
I don't blame them. I don't blame them.
So I took the fire escape. So we usually had 2 guys, so 2 girls. I had Janice, Mary Beth, Andy, Al, Perry, and Herbie, came along later on. And 2 guys would hit the door and be me and somebody else on the backside of the building. And as soon as they hit the door, you'd hear the window go whoosh, and then the head pop out. Go back and open the door, sunshine. And most of the time they did. Every once in a while, we had a Getty issue over there. And what was great is when they heard it was a warrant, they would come and you'd hear the big truck going, meh, 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 loud as anything, 6 o'clock in the morning, waking up the whole neighborhood. Before they even got out of the truck, you'd hear the key on the door go click, click, because the person inside knew it was coming for them. And that gets to where I'm going with this is we had a building right off the Sheridan Expressway. When you get off the Bronx River Parkway, you go on those 2 or 3 streets before it becomes the Sheridan Expressway. There was a huge apartment building there. It's one of these they built back in the day where you walked into the lobby and it went up 2 sets of stairs, one to the left, one to the right. So we get a warrant for a kid for a Rob 1. And it's just me and Al Nieves, my partner at the time. So we run the building, we run the apartment, and Dad has an A1 drug felony warrant. So this isn't your typical go get a kid warrant. This is, we got to be really careful here.
Right.
So we get the 4-8 over there. 2 kids show up from the midnight, and I take one, Al takes the other. So we each got one of the kids with us, and I get on the fire escape. Al goes to the door with the other guy. Bang, bang, bang. Window goes up. He pokes his head out. I'm sitting right above him. Go open the door. Ducks back in. He's not opening the door. We are not crawling into a bathroom window on the 5th floor in the fire escape. Call truck 3. Here they come. Still don't open the door. Out comes Sergeant John Coughlin.
Yes.
John Coughlin gets out. I tell the kid, watch the window. I come down the fire escape. I'm talking with John. He goes, are you sure he's in there? And he's breaking my chops. And I go, he's in there. There's no way. The other side of the building is straight down. There's not a ledge on it. There's not a fire escape. My guys are still up at the door. The kid's in the back on the fire escape. We never left it. He goes, he's not in there. You're buying me lunch. So I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I said, if he is in there, you buying me lunch? He goes, no, you're going to get a body out of this. So they suit up because I tell him Dad's got a A1 drug felony warrant. And these guys have to lug it up 5 flights of stairs. And they take the door, break it, pneumatic drill or whatever they used. And they get in. And I go, I'm still in the fire escape. You out there? Yeah. Come on in. So I'm figuring he's laying there in cuffs. I come up. He ain't in here. There's nobody in the apartment. I'm like, nah, there's no way. So me and Al go in because these kids could hide anywhere. And the kid we're looking for is 5'10", 180 pounds. This is not a little kid. He's a man.
Oh,
He's 16, 17 years old. We're checking every crack and crevice, cabinet. Sometimes we found him in cabinets on the top of the closet. Everybody always hid in the bathtubs. It's not there. So John goes, I want a chicken palm sandwich from the Pines restaurant. So I said, nope, I'm going to find him. He's here. He was there. So he goes, I said, all right, he's not here. He goes down. He's getting undressed. He's putting the helmet in, getting the truck. They drive down the block. And I'm like, Al, how the hell did he get out? It's this little kid standing across the street. It's 8 o'clock in the morning by now. We're there for an hour and a half already. And he's on the way to school. And he says, hi, officers. Are you looking for the bad guy? So my eyes light up. Yeah. So I go over and talk to him. And he says, he ran back in the building. I said, why? He came down the wire. I saw him. He slid all the way down the wire. It was a TV cable wire.
Jeez.
Black TV cable wire. He had a lot of faith in the Cablevision guy. And he slid down this wire from the 5th floor.
Oh, my God.
And ran right back into the building, into the lobby, underneath the staircase. So we go back inside, me and Al, and we hear crying. He's under the stairs, both his palms right down to the bone, singed. No bleeding because it's burnt.
Right.
He literally slid down this cable wire with his hands. So I argued with John. I said, he was still here. See, I told you. He says, you still owe me lunch. Years later, both his daughters got on the job. One was a civilian in DCPI. One was a cop. Erin worked for me for a brief period of time.
I love Erin. She's great.
Yeah. And I told them the story, and I said, I never got to buy your dad lunch because 9/11 happened.
Yeah. So
I bought her lunch and her sister lunch, but I gave them a story, and they laughed, and we had a good memory there. But the juvenile squad was a wild unit. We saved a lot of kids. When these kids would get in trouble, whether it was aftercare or probation, they were the bark. We were the bite. We were the DTs that would come get you. And we made sure that we took that to heart, because if we got these kids back quickly, they weren't getting multiple charges. And the judges back then would actually hold these kids for a couple of days and get them back into programs. We didn't see the recidivism you see today. 1 or 2 warrants. They got a second warrant. They were held for 6 months, because they were already found guilty of whatever their charges were.
Right.
But we were finding kids, we had them until they turned 21. But Al Nieves, I bring him up directly because we that was the squad I had 9/11 hit. And I was home. I was doing probably a 2 to 10 that day. We flip-flopped. And I get the call. They're looking at the TV. I turn it on, and there's the first building on fire. And literally jumped in the car and raced to the Bronx. 161st Street, where we were in the courthouse, was a free-for-all. People were running everywhere. We got suited up, got into our unmarked car, and we drove down the drive. We made it from the Bronx down to Gold Street, which is where our headquarters were, 300 Gold Street. And probably 7 minutes, there wasn't a soul on the road. Everybody was ready, out of the way. Cars were gone. They shut down all the roads. And then we got assigned to the Brooklyn Bridge at first to evacuate people over the bridge because we were out of Gold Street. And then we got sent over to the 13th. And we stood on the block. And probably 7 o'clock that night, truck 1 came back, covered in debris. Now, everything by then, 7 o'clock at night, both buildings are down. The other building 7.
7 World Trade to come down like at 5.
Yeah. So no traffic, no civilians anywhere. And there's 200 Detective Bureau personnel expecting to go to the morgue that night to start doing detective work, crime scene stuff. We were going to be deployed in that aspect. Yeah. It never came. A couple of guys tried to go over and help the truck 1 guys, and they wouldn't even talk to anybody. And they told us, don't touch the truck. They were just in the zone. So the next day we wound up over at the Armory on Lexington, and we were taking missing persons reports for the next 3 days in 90-degree heat, horrible locations. But Al Nieves wound up dying of 9/11 cancer many years later. Didn't even know he had it. So, but we were assigned to the morgue and to the site many, many nights. In the first month, probably the site more than anything, and then we were in the morgue until the following May. But it was a good group of people. Probably the only reason most of us got through it is who we were with. Now, being the sergeant, there were 2 teams assigned to the morgue each night, and we would probably get it 3 nights a week. And they were our sister unit, whether it's the Bronx Juvenile Squad with the Brooklyn or the Queens or the Manhattan. 2 of those teams from FED were in the morgue. One would get the security perimeter, top of Bellevue, men's shelter. The other one would be assigned to the table to assist the ME if anything came in. And a couple of nights were really busy, but I was on the table the day they found the fireman under the ramp the following April. I forget the date, but they found like 11 firemen almost completely intact under the last bit of debris when they started dismantling the ramp. And they were coming up one at a time every hour on the hour. We sat when our shift ended at 7 o'clock, we did 12-hour shifts. We couldn't go home. We were a mess. We were a complete mess. So they actually took a couple of us home in cars. We left our cars there and they just drove us home that night. But that was a good group of people I worked with. We wound up going to Columbia for a couple of weeks after that for help, just talk it out. They offered the job, got some help for members of the service. And I said to my guys, you're all going to Columbia. And they go, well, so are you. I'm basically taking care of them, but they wound up saying, we're not going unless you're going. And we all wound up going. So, but it was, yeah. But we did something to do with the morgue, with the Detective Bureau or the site security, which is probably where Al got sick from all the dust, because we were right in the heart of Building 7. That was where we got assigned 90% of the time. The dust kicking up. We were covered in dust every single night. And that's probably where he got sick.
Yeah. And guys are still dying.
Yeah.
NYPD captains just died. And here we are. It's going to be 24 years. 24 years. Guys, there's more firemen, and this is crazy to me, that have died of 9/11 cancer than the ones that got killed that day when the towers collapsed. There's more now. 343 died that day. For context, everybody knows that number. More have died of illness, and forget the NYPD numbers. 23 cops died that day, including Sergeant Coughlin, or Coughlin rather. Unfortunately, it's been triple that in the years since. And I'm glad you mentioned him, because before we continue, anybody who knew Sergeant Coughlin, and I've heard a lot of great stories on this program about him. I know his daughters and his widow very well. It's part of the ESU miniseries. Many guys that have been on the show work with him. He was a big guy. If there was ever a guy that you did not want to get into it with, if you were a suspect, it was Sergeant Coughlin. I've heard somebody describe him as strong as an ox. So that was the last guy you wanted to tussle with. And he was quick from what I heard too.
Well, he was also hungry. He liked to eat. So
call everybody lad. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things about the 9/11, which it took me a long time to deal with. Not that I was, every anniversary, even to this day, I do not go to sleep before midnight of the next day. I don't care how tired I am. My body cannot turn off until midnight. A couple of years ago, probably around the 18th anniversary, I figured I was going to just take the car and drive to every location that I dealt with, Brooklyn Bridge, the Armory, the site itself, where the old St. John's used to be down there. That's where we used to eat. It's gone now, on Chambers, and then to the morgue. Because every day I drove up the FDR Drive, when I got to 30th Street, I could smell the morgue. I can't explain it. It was all in here.
Right.
But I just couldn't get that out of my head. Didn't matter if I was going uptown or downtown, that smell would hit me just from the sight of where I was. After I did that, and I went and I took pictures. I hadn't been back to 30th Street since 2002. I took pictures and walked the block. It was a different place. It was like where the site is now. Once the buildings went up, things were different. But I took pictures, and I ended the day in Long Island City to see the two blue lights coming out of the site. And I drove home. I never had that smell ever again. It was like a relief off my shoulder because I got to see it when it was now, and it helped me to not remember what it was every single time I drove by it. So it was really wild. It took 18 years, though, to do that.
I'm glad you were able to do that. And God, I mean, you mentioned one truck, and I'm thinking when they said don't touch the truck, Brian McDonald was on that truck. Brian McDonald did not come home that day. He was a newie man too. He had just gotten there the previous year.
You also had Bobby Fazio from the 13th didn't come home. And Mora. Bobby was my cousin Maureen's steady driver for 10 years.
Wow.
So Maureen's brother, I mentioned, Billy, died of cancer in the 9th. Maureen was an active sergeant with 28 years on the job. She was getting tested every year, blood tests, just to make sure. And 1999, she gets a bad blood test, and she wound up dying of cancer in 6 weeks from diagnosis. While active in the 13th, Bobby Fazio was at her side 8 hours of the day on the job, and then stayed 8 hours on his own time every single day until she died. In fact, one day he prohibited me from going in because my cousin had gotten jaundice. And he says, Kevin, she doesn't want to see anybody. I said, Bobby, I'm a cousin. Kevin, you're not going in. And I looked at him. He says, do me a favor. You're not going in today. Come tomorrow. I'll tell you we're here, and I'll find out what she says. The next day, I did go see her, and she died a couple of days later. She was over at NYU. But Bobby was that kind of guy, loyal, good cop. Just you used to see him every day when you came in, sitting at the security desk of the police academy. There he is.
And there he is. That's one of the final photos, and this is poignant, of Bobby on 9/11. And him and Morris Smith were two of the first police officers, or among the first police officers, to go down there that day. Morris saw the plane hit. She put it over the radio. You can hear that transmission online. The NYPD has a video discussing the women who played a role in the response to 9/11. You can hear her transmissions. Bobby was with her. And look at that photo. It's obvious what he's looking at. He's looking at the World Trade Center. It would have been easy to say, you know what, I'm not going back. I'll just stay out here and help anybody who's coming out. No. And there's a great story, and I'm going to find it, and I'll take a moment here. This is live podcasting, folks, so bear with me. But there's a story that I have to share, if I could stop sharing the screen real quick, that somebody wrote on Officer Fazio's Officer Down Memorial page bio. And I'm going to read it here because this highlights the type of cop he was until the end. And see here. And again, give me a moment until I find it. But it spoke about a rescue that he made on someone who's been able to really live a great life since then. And again, I highlight Bobby too, and I'll find that when I find that story, I'll be sure to bring it up and read it. Because, and again, I mentioned this before in a previous episode, not diminishing what they did, but the 14 emergency service officers who died that day, including Sergeant Coughlin and Brian McDonald, they were in there, as Chief Anamone put it in a book, because they were sent in there. That was their role, to assist with the rescues. They were a rescue unit. Of course, it doesn't diminish their sacrifice. It was heroic until the end, but that was part of what they did. It was part of the scope of their duties as emergency service officers, which is what makes them so great. But what makes Bobby Morris so compelling, James Leahy from the 6th so compelling, Claude Richards from the Bomb Squad, John Perry, who was retiring that day for crying out loud, so compelling. Those other 9 cops of the 23, they didn't have to go in there. They had no reason to go in there. They did because whatever unit they were assigned to, it had nothing to do with their assignment. They were police officers that day, and they were until the very end. And I'm glad you bring Bobby up because that picture encapsulates the type of cop and the type of person he was.
I try to put that picture up every anniversary because
I'm glad you do.
Special people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You end up making lieutenant in 2002, and I will, before this episode is over, find that Bobby Fazio story. We're not going to finish this episode without reading that. You go over to Queens, go over to Astoria, and then later on IAB. But then again, this is kind of the part of your career where you're bouncing around, which is good. You get a variety. Manhattan for many years, Bronx for a little bit. Now you're in Queens. So as a platoon commander, which is different than what you were doing with juveniles, of course, and the work you did with the youth, although that would come around later as assistant commissioner, what was it like to be able to just work patrol?
So what was wild is you mentioned earlier about the differences in boroughs.
Yeah.
Manhattan, the Bronx, now Queens. When I got there, and again, Dad was a good teacher for me. And he says, you know, the best thing you can do is go in and watch for the first couple of weeks when you're the new boss. He says all the fakers will display their fakeness within the first 2 weeks. So I went in and, you know, everybody was doing their thing, being on their best behavior the first 2 weeks. I'm the new platoon commander. And I had the day tour platoon because it's the one that doesn't pay anything, you know, no night diff or anything else. So that's the one everybody jumps off first. And I'm watching. And sure enough, I'm watching guys holding jobs, not answering the radio. And it's the veterans. The kids all want to run around and, you know, they're still gung-ho, but I had a couple of veterans that were playing the game. We get a job, dropped call, 3:00 in the afternoon, and these 2 veterans pick up the job because it's a block from the station house, and they go 325, 90X Central. So I hear it. All right, I'm heading back to the command 2. It's send a tour. All of a sudden, I get a call on the radio from another sector. Another sector gets flagged down by civilians on that block. 4 residents have lived there for 25, 30 years, and the mailman, who's their regular mailman. And they tell the 2 cops something's wrong. And then we find out that's the same location where the drop call is. Well, needless to say, the kids call me. I get over there, and I said, where's the landlord? Oh, it's some woman that lives in Great Neck. I said, okay, we're not waiting. We took a crowbar, and we popped the door. And there's the lady laying on the floor, drooling from her mouth, phone off the hook, going, because it's been off the hook forever. The son had called and asked us to check, and the lady had a stroke. So I'm the platoon commander now. So we had to deal with this. And it was a much different way to deal with it than most people probably think. Oh, they got IB, charged in specs. No, they got assigned to the Triborough Bridge and the Con Ed plant terrorism posts for the next 6 months with no vehicle, no meal. Good luck. And sure enough, union guys come in and they complain. And then I tell them what happened. I said, so 2 guys did the wrong thing. Then 2 kids did the right thing. And we have a woman still alive because they did the right thing. Do you really want to go down this path? I said, my father was a delegate too. So I said, I'll go whatever way you want to go. But as of now, that's how it stands. And that's how I dealt with a lot of issues. You dealt with it in-house. But those 2 kids saved that woman's life just because of laziness of 2 others. So it was, even though it was there a brief time, there was things like that that happened very quickly. Nobody carried a stick in Queens. We had the largest housing developments in the country. Nobody had a stick in their car. So again, letting it go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, letting the sergeants run the roll call. And then January 2nd hit. I became a lieutenant in late November 2002. Right after New Year's, that's when I started making my point. And I walked in and I said, all right, we're going to fall in for inspection. You thought I hit them with a ton of bricks. They didn't even know what to do because they didn't do that out there. And they didn't know how to line up. A couple of guys didn't have hats at roll call. A couple of guys didn't have sticks. And I looked at the sergeant after he inspected because he didn't know how to inspect. And he said, no violations, sir. So I said, okay, now I'm going to inspect. By the time we got done, we had 28 violations.
Jesus.
So I said, put yourself down for 1-2, Sarge, and put it in the book. Just minor violations, no CDs. But the message was getting sent. So everybody go get a stick. You know, I told the midnight platoon commander, who's a good guy, Jerry, and I said, you keep your guys out until 8 o'clock. We were conducting training this morning for the first hour. So they kept the midnight out till 10 to 8. And everybody got the sticks and we went out. The next day, a riot breaks out in the Astoria houses at like 8 o'clock in the morning. It's like 40 people. God knows what it was over. But literally, the 5 cars shoot down the avenue straight from the precinct. And they get right down to Astoria houses quickly. And everybody's getting out of the car with a stick in their hand. You had to see the crowd. Their eyes went like,
never mind.
What?
Back it up, boys.
It almost stopped immediately. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. All because they got out of the car with sticks in their hand. They looked like they meant business. Nobody got hit. Nobody got whacked. But it was the presence that got established that day. And then the next day at the platoon, we talked about it. I said, if you look like you're going to be able to take care of business, you usually don't have to. So it was definitely a little bit different in Queens than I had seen. I love the cops. They just need a little more guidance. And I got an offer to take over the juvenile crime squad as the CO. The lieutenant that had recruited me was retiring. And he reached out to me, and the CO of Fed did at the time. And he said, Kevin, we want you to apply for the job, but you got to go through the interview. So I had to go through the detective IAB narcotic interview where everybody's in the loop. And sure enough, I don't get the job. I get sucked into IAB for 2 years. And that's how I wound up in internal affairs, trying to get back to the detective bureau. So
I'll, before I did find the Fazio story, I'm going to read it temporarily, or in a moment, rather, I should say. But just as a sidebar, it goes back again. It's full circle to when you were on the post as a Midtown cop at the time, and that was your beat, and you own that beat. Same thing here. Here you are, a lieutenant, all these years later, instilling those same lessons in your cops. Like, wait a minute, it doesn't mean you have to go out there and take care of business. Preferably, you don't have to, but it's your post. It's your neighborhood. You own it. The community's part of it, yes, but it's your job to keep it clean and orderly. And that night, it was kept orderly. Job well done. So here's the Fazio story. I'm going to try to read this quickly so I don't choke up on the podcast here. But this is from a woman named Melanie. She wrote this on the Officer Down Memorial page, September 9th, 2011, a couple days before the 10th anniversary. She says, thank you for saving my husband on that day. You pulled him from the concourse, got him out, and put him into an ambulance before you ran back in to save more lives. I didn't even know him then, but your selflessness and extreme courage this day is changing the course of lives. Please know that the man you saved is doing great things as a foster parent to children in need, and he rescues animals as well. He is a wonderful father to these children. Your legacy lives on in him and in them and in everything they and their children and their children's children will do. They will know about you. You will never, ever be forgotten. Woman named Melanie, spouse of the man that Officer Fazio saved, September 9th, 2011. Great story. Great story. And like I said, we were not going to conclude this episode without reading that story. Officer Fazio, you are remembered, my friend.
Well, I thank you for that because I never heard that story. I never saw that, and I really appreciate that.
No problem. That's on the Officer Down Memorial page, archived forever. Just one of the many great things that he did over the course of his 17 years on the job. I talked about this a couple weeks ago with John McCary, who you know, of the Finest Unfiltered, because he was in IAB for a little bit too. And as well with Commissioner Harrison, who was on a little while ago too. It's not a fun assignment. It's described as the necessary evil of law enforcement. You do need it. And it's unfortunate you need it because certain people can't do their job correctly and follow the oath that they took and think it's just a joke. But nevertheless, it's not fun. Nobody wants to go in there and bust fellow cops. You'd rather this all be bullcrap and it's a false accusation they didn't do anything wrong. Unfortunately, sometimes that is the case. Sometimes the cop didn't do anything wrong and they get cleared. Sometimes it's not. And you got to bring down some dirty cops and keep the NYPD clean. It wasn't long, and I imagine it wasn't that enjoyable. But how did you make it work?
So ironically, being involved with the schools. So one of the things I did when I was in Midtown North, just to rehash real quick, in 1995, I got called by Wilbur Chapman, who was the chief of patrol at the time,
Yes.
to testify at the Mayor's Commission on School Safety. So it was a huge commission that Giuliani had put together to discuss the NYPD taking over schools. I was on the front page of the New York Times with then my CO, Diana Pizzuti, telling the story about a meat cleaver in a kid's head and the difficulty I had with a principal who wanted to remove the meat cleaver from the kid's head. And I had to threaten to arrest him if he did. And that was the story on the front page of the New York Times. But that led to when I got into IAB, I guess they look at your background, what you've done. I wound up going to Group 53, which is school safety.
Full circle.
I didn't ask to go there, wound up getting it. Timmy Kerr was the CO at the time, who was a captain, dynamite man, really good guy. And he basically explained, listen, this is a necessary evil the job needs. Do your job and you'll get through this. Most of the cases with school safety were either something to do with child abuse, sex abuse with students, or drugs. Again, allegations. But I had two cases, one in particular where an agent was accused of having sex with a 15-year-old girl. And we did our investigation. I was the team lead. I had two sergeants with me. And we proved that case. And he was charged with sodomy and went to jail. We had another case where an agent his mother had died. I felt bad for this guy. He lived in Queens in 113. And he fell in love with a woman. And she wound up getting pregnant. And she had a baby. And as soon as the baby was born, she told him, I don't love you anymore. I want you out of my life. The guy went into a deep depression. And he was probably 50 years old at the time. And he was probably on a job over 25 years. He wound up getting caught up with his cousins who were drug dealers out of Brooklyn. And his mother had passed away and his mother had left him a house mortgage free, beautiful house in Jamaica. And the cousins had him take out a mortgage and buy new cars. And they basically ran up his credit and got him hooked on crack. And when he didn't show up he was AWOL for 4 or 5 days, we had to find him. We're looking for a member of the service. And me and my team found the drug dealer cousin driving his Chrysler 300 through East New York. And when we pulled the guy over, we arrested him for stolen vehicle. And it was a half a key of coke in the trunk. And we wound up finding him in an SRO in Bushwick, smoking crack. But he was dismissed. So that's what kind of cases we were dealing with. So it was an experience. You learned how to do internal investigations. Don't regret the cases I had because I think we did a fair job. But we probably cleared 85, 90% of the agents that were accused of things. So in that sense, it was a really good thing because agents' careers were in the balance and most of them were doing their jobs, but it's tough dealing with kids.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, we can't forget too, around this time, Orville Williams had a heart attack, breaking up 2 fights back in 99, a little bit before you got there. And I think that same year, 05, right before you ended up going over special projects, Vivian Samuels got assaulted. She got hit over the head trying to break up a fight and died. Yep. So, their job, it's a little bit of a different job, but it's dangerous. I mean, I dealt with it to a lesser extent here in Connecticut. Not that I was ever an SRO, but I was in a pretty rough middle school here in New Haven where we had some kids from some neighborhoods that weren't the best. And they don't care, man. Some of them were all right, but some of them were very violent. And, they didn't care who you were. And especially if you were a figure of authority, a teacher, a police officer, a security guard, they were more than willing to go at it. And that's a scary kid to deal with. A scary criminal, period. The one that doesn't have anything to lose. So
how I get out of IB, I did my 2 years to the day. Most people usually get stuck until the paperwork's done, 2.5, 3 years. From a chief in Manhattan North saying, we have a youth problem. We need your help. Do you want a job? So I'm sitting there going, yeah, but I'm in IB for at least 3 or 4 months. He says, Lieutenant, do you want the job or not? We need somebody to come fix our youth problem in Manhattan North. So I said, Ray Diaz was the borough commander at the time. So I said, okay, I'll see you in a couple of months. That afternoon, a phone call came down. You're transferred. Timmy Kerr looks at me and goes, who did you call? I said, I didn't call anybody. Somebody called me. But now I got to travel from Eastern Long Island all the way to the west side of Manhattan. So I don't know how good this is going to be. And Jimmy Secreto at the time was the head of school safety. Great guy too, Jimmy. But I wound up in the borough of Manhattan North, and I was told, we need you to fix this youth problem. You're going to oversee the schools. You're going to oversee anything in the parks, the kids. And, you know, I had school sergeants in every command. We did truancy operations, but we did them practically and really had a finger to the pulse with the gangs. And I started realizing what gang was calling a gang, whether it's Bloods, Crips, they weren't getting the bigger picture on a local level. I think back in the day, we used to call them crews. You know, on 140th Street, it was the 40 Wolves, and, you know, East Army out of the projects in the 2-3. We were getting down to the nitty gritty and figuring out this wasn't narcotics fighting. This was territory. This is, you live here, I live there. And that's where our beef was. The CEO of PSA 6 was Kevin Catalina, now the Suffolk County Police Commissioner. So I get a case, and again, going back to juvenile squad, I knew the system inside and out with Office of Children and Family Services, with warrants, probation, all the agencies that dealt with these kids out of courthouse. And I get a call that they have a homicide case there's a robbery case where the kid had a gun, and on the school bag there was all sorts of graffiti on it. And I was pretty good at reading this stuff. You know, Louis Savelli was one of my initial gang guys I learned from the 7-2 when CPOP was started. His partner, Steve Harris, was the squad commander of the 2-6. So I'm looking at the bag. The gang captain, O'Toole, calls me, and Terry O'Toole, and he says, do you know anything about this? And I said, yeah, I know what that is. Opportunity Charter Schools on 113th Street.
Right.
So I reach out to the principal. He's locked up with a gun in this school bag. And his name was Edward. He's 17 years old. So I get the guidance counselor, and I said, I'm just kind of concerned. Meanwhile, I'm really just trying to get some information. I'm kind of concerned who he hung out with because he got caught with a gun walking towards the school by the gang division. Do you know Edward? She goes, well, if you know Edward, then you got to know Deshawn. They're like attached at the hip. So I'm like, oh, okay. Who's Deshawn? She gives me the name. So I run Deshawn, and it turns out he's got an Office of Children and Family Services warrant in the Bronx to one of the caseworkers who I knew for many years up there. So I reach out to her. Her first name was Azizi. So I call Azizi, and she goes, yeah, he's on the way to the office now. We're going to violate him. I said, well, do you mind if I pick him up? So I pick him up. I get him in the back of the car, and I start talking to this kid on the way to the squad. And I said, you know, Edward got caught. I'm using his real first name, but his street name. And he says, yeah. I said, you know, he got caught with the hammer, right? That's what they called the gun back then. And he says, yeah. I said, did you ever hold the hammer? He says, yeah. So I transport him to the 2-6 squad because they're looking at these two kids for the murder of a 40-year-old man who they stole a cell phone from and multiple other robberies. So I drop him off with Steve Harris at the squad. I said, here you go, hand delivered. And I leave. Later that night, I get a call from Steve. Where do you want to have dinner? He says, you want to go to Peter Luger's? And I said, why? He says, he just confessed to the homicide and 3 gunpoint robberies, including one where they shot a kid and paralyzed them.
Jeez.
And he says, how did you find out about these guys? I said, well, I'm looking at them on social media on a site called Skonex, which still stood for School Network. It was like the first social media for high school kids. And I said, they got the list of all the names. There's 35 names on this list of the whole crew, and they're all out of the St. Nick houses. So I start identifying government names off this list by taking the pictures off the social media and looking through photos, and I start building a book of the Get Money Boys. So after I get done with that, I start identifying the crew out of Drew Hamilton houses and a couple other housing developments in PSA 6. And Catalina is thrilled to death because I'm giving him all this information. nice, neat set books. He becomes the CEO of the 3-2 precinct. And he says, could you do the same thing in the 3-2? Look at all the crews there. I said, sure. I said, but I need you to convince your other fellow COs. I said, I'm just a lieutenant. Next thing you know, we have 32, 33 crews identified in Manhattan North. And I'm even starting to dwell into the South Bronx because we went from Skonex to MySpace, which was a treasure trove of intel, to Facebook. MySpace was where we really got started. And the borough commander is Phil Banks, who sees not only was I identifying this stuff, but I was giving presentations to community groups about what the kids in the neighborhood were doing on social media. And this is why this group is doing robberies, and this is where your kids are fighting with this school. So he sees it, and after doing all this work of identifying Manhattan North crews, he gets me down to Ray Kelly at 1PP. And I have to give this presentation to the police commissioner. On the way down, I'm throwing up on the side of the road. I have the flu. Full, not nervous or anything. Right. I'm literally sick with the flu. I'm with two chiefs in the car that are telling me, suck it up, get down there, you got to do this. I'm purple by the time I get to headquarters after throwing up on the FDR Drive 3 or 4 times. I finally get settled. I get up there, and I'm in the room, and I'm giving the full presentation to probably a dozen executives. And he's sitting there, and from what I heard from the chief, he likes to look at his phone if he's bored at a presentation. He listens, but he's looking at his phone. He only looked at his phone once. So I said, after the thing, I said, got to get me out of here. Threw up a couple more times, went back to the borough. And I'm being told the next day, you hit a grand slam. I said, he says, Kevin, this is supposed to be a 10-minute presentation. You were in there for 40 minutes. He says, you hit a grand slam. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'll see you in a couple of days when I get back. Almost a full year goes by. I hear nothing. I said, yes, so much for the home run grand slam. Not LSA, not special assignment, nothing. Phone call comes in from then Commissioner Farrell and says, report to headquarters tomorrow in dress uniform. So I'm like, okay. And I go down there, and he says, the commissioner is going to offer you a position. So I don't know what that says. And next thing you know, he said, I had 24 years on the job at the time. He says, did you take the captain's test? I said, no, I want to be a captain. I've already been divorced once, and I like this wife. I'm still married to her, by the way. So he's laughing. I said, oh, that's serious. I said, I don't want to be a captain in an XL for the next 4 to 5 years, working God knows what hours, what shifts, what days. I'm 24 years, lieutenant in the borough. I'm God right now. It's a great job. Yeah. I have my own world. I have the entire borough to oversee all the kid and gang stuff. So he's laughing. He says, why don't captains tell me this? I said, I don't know. He goes, well, can you do what you're doing in Manhattan North citywide? I said, well, I probably have most of the Bronx mapped out already. And he looks at me, and I said, I'm serious. He says, who's doing it with you? I said, I have one cop with me. His name is Andy Dunton. I said, this kid, I took him under my wing after he had an incident, and he's worth his weight in gold. He's helping me out. So he says, well, you can't do this as a lieutenant, so I guess we're going to have to make you a civilian. And right there on the spot, he offered me assistant commissioner. And that's how that came about, from doing the work up in Manhattan North.
And that was the next dozen years of your career, which I'll dive into from the social media standpoint. You saw, and we'll wait for the connection to come back. Hold on just a second. Let's put him in the backstage while that gets sorted out. We lost him temporarily. But again, appreciate all you guys tuning in tonight. This is right now episode 366 of the podcast with retired NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor ultimately did just about 35 years in the NYPD. He has him back now. We have him back now, I should say. So what I was going to mention is you saw the transformation in terms of policing when it comes to social media. When you came on, nobody had that wasn't even a thought. You were a cop in the 80s. You were a cop in the 90s. We had AOL chat rooms in the 90s, but that was about the extent of it. Then around 05, 06, MySpace, later on, which will become Facebook. Twitter starts up. We get Instagram towards the end of the 2000s. Now forget about it. There's whole dedicated social media units for police departments large enough across the country, not just the NYPD. So as this is starting to sprout up in those 12 years, you were an assistant commissioner under quite a variety of different New York City police commissioners. Just tell me about, again, really prowling Instagram, prowling Twitter, sometimes prowling these networks which are private. Snapchat, it goes away after 24 hours. Kick was a very private, which I used for a time when I was a teenager. Text chat. There's even an app where you could hide the chat behind the calculator. So tell me about staying up to date with these trends as more apps come out and kids get more and more wiser, sometimes too wise for their own good.
So the thing about gang members is they want to brag.
That is true.
They did 20 years ago, they did 10 years ago, and they still do today.
Yep.
So what we got very good at is they'll put something up and then they'll take it down, or it's on a site that'll remove it. We found ways to capture that information before it was gone. So if there was an incident, we knew social media accounts for every gang member that we had. We had identified 9,000 gang members that were not in the database at the time through social media. And that's when they got rid of the old IDS system and created what they have now in ECMS, the case management system.
Yes.
Because this IDS system was so obsolete. It had members that were 40, 50 years old. Ours were the finger on the pulse trigger pulls. And the documentation we were able to use, we had a software at the time, which was called Palantir, which is a famous company. They're into everything now, but it was a military type software that enabled us to do link analysis and pull all this information that we were pulling together. But we also set the case law in New York, getting subpoenas, warrants on social media pages to get the private messages and what wasn't showing publicly. We had to go into judges and prove that we had probable cause to get this information. And I had a couple of detectives. Brian Moore was a kid I took out at a 3-2.
God.
And Brian wanted to go to Hawaii to be a cop for a while after he made detective with us. And now he's not even in law enforcement. But Brian just had this knack of obtaining information. And what my job was, I got to a point where I said, Brian, I don't need any more information. I needed to get it across the finish line because he was just going in every direction. It is an unlimited amount of information. But we had to bring it down a little bit. So finally, Brian took the Bronx case and really did a bang-up job. And he went after the 6-4 YBs and a couple of other groups. And we were getting to the finish line with convictions in court to a ton of warrants to social media, subpoenas, capturing the sites. The first case I did was with Andy Dunton. Andy was able to take down, he was familiar with the east side of Manhattan. He worked out at a 2-5 for many years. But he took down 3 crews in the Taft, Johnson, and Lehman House, 63 members, all social media conversations captured, thousands upon thousands of pages of warrants, all done legitimately, no entrapments. When the case broke and Manhattan gang came in and did the arrest warrants, and we picked up the 63. There were, I believe, 3 homicides tied in and 33 non-fatal shootings to this case. There were 0 trials. There was so much information. The only thing defense attorneys could go after us for is, did we obtain the information legally? And we absolutely did. We dotted the I's, crossed the T's, got our warrants. Everything was there. And the judges would rule in our favor on each case brought about the evidence that after maybe 10 to 12 cases, they really had no choice but to take plea bargains. And those cases led to 4 years to 22 years in jail for the 63 members. And that was the first real social media case. So we were trendsetters when it came to the case law with that stuff. But the work kept growing and growing. Every squad started calling us about it. Every incident that was serious. So when I left, we had over 5,000 cases that we were part of with the social media unit. And it had grown from just being a kid thing, a crew gang thing, to every homicide, every shooting. I remember sitting in the hospital at St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx on July 5th, the morning after July 4th, when Officer Familia was shot and killed in the THV. Yeah. And we were able to find that perp on social media while sitting in the hospital. The same thing happened when I was down in Walt Disney World on vacation with my family for my daughter. My daughter has a very serious genetic disorder called Sanfilippo syndrome. We got to make a wish trip out of it. So I wasn't taking the job phone. This is about her and my kids and my family because we're dealing with what is a terminal illness. And knock on wood, she's 20 years old and still with us. But I get the call that 2 cops were just executed in Brooklyn. Ramos and
Ramos. Yeah.
My guys, and this is 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm getting a call because my personal phone is ringing. Only a few people had that. And sure enough, it's Andy and another guy, Brian DeDon. And they're already on a Saturday, I believe, were in the office working on it, capturing everything they could find on this guy and anybody associated with him. So, we went from a simple gang thing to worst of the worst, dealing with cop killers and memorializing information. But it's a very powerful tool, social media. And the thing that they had to realize is the venue constantly changed. The techniques are still the same.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. Timely capture of information is what's key.
Hence the name, the SMART Unit, Social Media Analytics and Research Team. We're talking with retired NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor. The reason why I went, oh God, earlier is because I thought for a moment, different Brian Moore. I thought you were talking about Detective Brian Moore, who was killed in line of duty in Queens.
No.
Different officer who's under your purview. And glad to see that he excelled, even though he's in a different career field now. At least he was able to work out for a while. And the thing, too, that you saw, like the common theme, too, about besides them being braggadocious, most criminals you find, and this is the thing that keeps police in business across the country, across the world, they're pretty stupid. Because with the drill rap thing, too, you're seeing these guys literally. MF Doom, the late great MF Doom, had a song called Rap Snitches, where the point of the song that he raps about is guys are quite literally telling on themselves. Back then they would do this, try to hide naturally until they were caught. Now they're on video with guns in the video, some of them fake, some of them real, talking about and naming, I did this, I did that. And sometimes you can say, okay, yeah, some of these rappers are just posing, trying to make themselves look tough, but they're not. In real life, they're not doing any of that. And they'll tell you themselves. Some of these guys were actually committing these crimes and then bragging about it in the video.
Yep.
It's the easiest court case you could possibly put together. And by the way, before you answered that, Paul Rogers, who's been on this show as part of my FDNY miniseries, Best of the Bravest, he was a cop at the 13th Precinct, says, hey, Kevin, I work with you and Bobby Fazio in the 13th. So he sends his regards. But I'm like, how stupid can you? That's why Bobby Schmurda went to jail for all those years. He told on himself in his own songs.
And that was one of our cases. The GS9 case was with the guys in my Brooklyn team.
God,
we worked on that case with the gang unit. We are not doing this by ourselves. We were the intel gatherers, and then you had teams, squad detectives and gang units that would take the information and be able to push it over that line and make the apprehensions. We were just a piece of that big puzzle. But it was an honor to work with all these squads. The amount of work that they put into these takedowns and cases, fantastic. It was very rewarding. But we did a lot of good work just using that social media networking. And the cops I took, these weren't first grade detectives. They weren't computer geeks. I needed street cops that could understand that language like you talked about the drill rapping, can make sense out of it. These guys could put everything together. They knew the beefs and the nuances of what was going on in the neighborhood, that if we had a shooting in the 7-9, my guys could simply plug into a couple of the guys they knew were from each of those crews and see who's talking. It was amazing. Our news feeds were built to the point that we were embedded in so many of these groups that I could read a news feed and tell you what the violence was in the city of New York that day, just by reading news feeds.
Mm-hmm.
The credibility we had too was great. Like I said, I believed in giving information to community. So when the gang would come in and take down 100 gang members in one shot, it wasn't just a shock and awe on the whole community. We were laying the groundwork, showing community groups. We would get invited by community affairs or precinct community councils to show what was going on with these kids on social media and put actual pictures up on a screen. This is what they're doing over here. This is what they're doing over here. We don't do that anymore. You have to lay that groundwork so community understands why there's such a big enforcement out there. And when you do that, you have buy-in from the community. I mentioned the 3 homicides, 33 non-fatals. We went almost 2 years without any violence in that neighborhood after that takedown. We didn't lock up every single person in a gang. We took the 20 top people in the 3 gangs, and it worked. But the groundwork was laid way ahead of time. But very rewarding unit to work with.
I go back to something Richie Teamsbaum, my dear friend who's retired out of the bomb squad in 02, passed away from 9/11 cancer last year. When he would teach for DHS and after he retired, he would always talk about the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And I always go back to that with Richie because the reason I mention is, to your point, the tools are right there. especially in today's day and age, if you're going to run a unit like that, or just policing in general, I get it. You don't want to betray the gut feel. You don't want to betray the gut instinct. And obviously, with the naked eye can see, that's important too. But with how much we have at our disposal, technologically speaking, and how stupid these criminals are and how omnipresent they are in social media, it's almost a ground ball. So we don't have to complicate the formula here. The formula, as you said, the groundwork's been laid. The formula's been there. It's proven to work. If it's not broke, and here's the NYPD's problem now, amongst many other things that we don't have to get into. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
They're trying to fix something that isn't broke.
They kept trying to sell us all sorts of software to do this. The social media units are the software. It's
Exactly.
a network. They have the algorithms. We just found a way to manipulate that information to build criminal cases. And you talk about stupid as the stupid does. While I was still a lieutenant, I had the schools, 135th Street in Harlem, very busy place. You have 3 main schools on the drag. On the top of the hill, you had a school up by City College. I'm trying to think of it, AP Randolph. Then you had Bread and Roses right on Bradhurst and 135th down in Bronx from the precinct. Thurgood Marshall was on the corner of the block with the 32nd. So you had all these kids traveling. So I was out there a lot in uniform, and I hear pop, pop, pop. And I'm like, oh, my God, there's kids everywhere. Virginia Valerie, a grandmother, was laying in the middle of the intersection right in front of Harlem Hospital with a bullet in her leg, just like the woman that was just shot in East Harlem yesterday.
Right in the face, yeah.
Same thing. So I have a very good knack of keeping things in my head. Don't ask me my kids' teachers' names. I can't tell you, but I can remember perps and faces. And all of a sudden, I see one of my gang members running, and I stop him. I said, where you going? And he goes, well, I said, who's shooting at the YGs, or 357 at the time? That was the name of his crew. And he says, oh, OY, which was a crew out of the 3-0. So I knew exactly what he was talking about. 2 detectives that stopped when I stopped. They saw me get out of the car, so they stopped to make sure I was okay. They said, what the hell is he saying? I said, I know exactly what he's saying. So I said, get your butt home, get around the corner, get home before I come and find your mother. He didn't know me from a hole in the wall. He never saw me before. He just knew I was using language that only someone that knew him would. The woman goes into the hospital. I go to the squad. I tell the squad commander, this is 357 and OYG. How do you know? I find OYG videos all over YouTube, and it's still up today. 15 years later, it's still on YouTube today. The whole OYG crew mobbing through Times Square, 30, 40 deep, bragging how tough they are. You see the New York Times building in the background. They go down. All of a sudden, you hear, whoa, whoa, whoa. They scramble, probably because they see uniform up in Times Square, and they run down into the hole, and they're in a subway, and they're still filming live. And they start showing each other faces. And there's one of the main guys, and he's Joseph, and he's holding a gun, pointing it at his hand, like he's a real badass. So right next to him is the guy that was described as the shooter, who was a Rice High School student at the time, no criminal record. So he had no photos. But now I got him on YouTube. I find his MySpace page. I make simple cards with his picture on it, and I give it to the 3-0 anti-crime because that's where he resides. They get him, and they get him in the car, and he's arrested and charged with shooting this woman. And he makes statements. I was in the squad when they did it, and I got to talk to him. His dad didn't want anybody talking to the cops. And I walked in and I showed his father the video from Times Square subway station because he kept saying, not my son, not my son. He worked for the city. He was a good man. His wife's good. His son just got caught up in the wrong crowd. And when I showed him the video, he looked at his son. He says, you better tell the truth or I'm out of here. I broke the man's heart showing him the video of his son acting like a complete perp. And they had taken over a candy store downstairs and just removed everything they wanted. The whole crew. What's this guy going to do to 40 kids? The kid said, I said, I have one question for you. Why'd you shoot the lady? And he looked at me. He says, I wasn't shooting at her. I was shooting at OY. Done. We're finished. And that was it. That's all we needed. And he wound up getting 4 years in jail. Ironically, 10 years later, he's dropped off at the hospital. Never get arrested again. Left the city. Was living in New Jersey somewhere. They get a call of a man stabbed being brought into Harlem Hospital. Guess who?
Okay.
So he shoots a woman in front of Harlem Hospital, and 10 years later, he's brought in with a knife wound and dies on the table in Harlem Hospital. Yep. Goes around, comes around.
Hey, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's literally what I was about to say. And it's like, the thing that annoys me is, well, you shouldn't be firing guns, period. But if you're going to, this is the thing that pisses me off with these shootings, and it happens here in New Haven too. If you're going to shoot someone, can you at least hit the right target? I'm not advocating shooting. Shooting is bad, as we know. And it sounds funny to say that, but I'm dead serious. They never, ever hit the person they're trying to shoot. It's like clockwork. Yep. Somebody who has nothing to do with the shooting. Sometimes it's a child. Yesterday, it was a poor 69-year-old woman with a walker who was simply walking through her neighborhood. God forbid they actually hit the person they're trying to shoot. It's always somebody innocent. And did that woman that got shot in the leg, at least did she live?
Yes, she
okay, good. At least she lived.
She was 66. It's coming to my head now. She was 66 years old when she got hit. This is 3:00 in the afternoon, broad daylight,
with kids down the street at school. It's just, again,
But the reason I know about these guys, like you said, we have the technology. Mm-hmm. That first case I talked about, Edwin and Deshaun, I would make sure I had an alert that if they got moved in the jail system, I would know about it. So I know when these guys get out. And I get an alert from e-courts. And Deshaun gets out, and sure enough, I find him still using the same exact social media sites that he had when he went in. And he's driving around the Bronx doing gunpoint robberies. We notify the Bronx, send him the pictures, and he gets apprehended doing gunpoint robberies in the Bronx. He's back in jail today. He's still in jail.
As he should be.
But again, they don't care that we know that we're doing this. They just assume we're not doing it. And it's up to us, law enforcement, to make sure we are doing it.
You know what, too? On top of that, that's majority of the crime rate in New York City. It's recidivist.
Yep.
You address your recidivist, you keep your recidivist locked up. It's a miracle how much that does to drive the crime rate down. It's a domino effect. You take care of those guys, like you did earlier with the top 20, as you were talking about. Everything else, it levels out. And now I will say, technologically speaking, in terms of keeping up with these miscreants, ChatGPT now, that's another tool that everybody's using. I use it all the time. The NYPD using it. That's talk about another ground ball. If they use it correctly, there's another way to keep tabs on these guys and bring them down as soon as they get out of line.
Yep. So after that, when Dermot Shea he was chief of detectives while I was doing all the smart work.
Yeah.
He becomes police commissioner. And I had stayed on top. I was the youth expert through the job with everything because of the juvenile squad. I knew everything about it. When they needed information, I could get it through Office of Children and Family Services. If the kid had a warrant, just different tools to bring to the table. So when he became the police commissioner, SMART was running smooth. We had won a unit citation, multiple awards. We won the IACP. I think we were the only NYPD unit to win the IACP first prize for investigative techniques. In 2013, we won that. That was a great honor that we got. We went down to Philly. Of course, the year we win it's in Philly. It's not in San Diego. It's not in Florida. It's in Philly. So no offense to Philly, but I've been to Philly.
Philly, San Diego.
Yes.
Philly, San Diego.
But I had taken that as far as I thought I could take it. And I wanted to get back to the kids because I saw such a lack in it. Raise the age was killing us. So I asked to go back and do something. And Shay said, what do you want to do? So he made that his platform. And of course, COVID hits 3 months into it. So we did the best we could, but we created the whole YCO program, really got into dealing with the youth recidivism to counter the raise the age. We knew who the bad kids were. To this day, I'm still posting stuff on LinkedIn about this raise the age stuff. When I left, my top recidivist, had 88 arrests by his 18th birthday. 74 of them were for robbery. So people didn't believe me when I told them that. I said, well, your top 10 recidivists of juveniles that are still juveniles, according to the new law, have over 450 arrests between them. I said, so imagine this. We stopped this kid by his fourth arrest. There would be 400 less victims in the city of New York. 400 less felony crimes. Not to mention, most of those victims are other kids.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
It is.
And I post stuff recently about what's going on with the kids. We had a 14-year-old kid stabbed to death in Williamsbridge Oval in the Bronx 3 weeks ago. You didn't even hear about it. A couple of days later, you get 4 kids shot outside of school. Don't even hear about it. And this is all within the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's the problem is the media doesn't like to, and the administrations, including the police department, doesn't like to talk about this stuff because when it comes to kids, it's hard to talk about violence with kids. We see the Ascension School thing going on right now. But that's every day in New York. You have to keep on top of this, but it gets no traction whatsoever.
And it's a shame.
And youth crime's up 70% in the last 5 years. Talking thousands of kids being robbed, causing more gang members because they need their own protection. So they join gangs to protect themselves. And the cycle just keeps repeating. And it's just getting worse by the day. So it's disheartening, but that's where I left it. And I tried to train the next group of cops on how to deal with juveniles and kids. And it was, at least I was able to do what I wanted to do. The way I started, I finished at the end.
And the thing that makes our particular conversation that we're having tonight unique is that you're not out that long. You're only out 2 years,
Yep.
So your finger on the pulse. I mean, I know the gripe that some, and I'm not going to name them, we know who I'm talking about, have that are currently higher up in the department, have with retired members is, they've been gone a while, so how could they know what's going on now? Do you really want to challenge a guy who was as heavily involved as you were and is only gone 2 years? It's really not much, unfortunately, has changed in those 2 years. So when you see it, I mean, as you said, you hit it on the head. It's disheartening.
Well, my biggest beef with the department is the lack of leadership in taking care of the personnel.
Big problem.
That is the number one problem. We are burning people at both ends of the stick. I mean, this weekend is the worst weekend of the year. There are guys that are going to be working 20, 30, 40 hours with Juve, the Labor Day parade. That's not leadership or management. You can't work people like that. Cops need a quality of life. You need to be able to see your kids. You need to be able to say, I'm off tomorrow. It can't just be nonstop. We're going to surge 1,000 cops to the Bronx. Where are you getting them from? There's only 33,000 cops. Every time they put a class in, it barely makes up for what they lost in the previous 6 months. They have to start understanding that because they're just burning people out. There are still plenty of people that want to do the job. We just saw it. 1,000 kids just went into the academy.
Yeah.
They want to join for the right reason. It's the jobs. It's suicides in the police department. Don't even get me started with those. They don't even talk about them. We have help for you. No, you're causing a lot of distress. The stress of the street was always the stress of the street. The stress of the bad guy was always the stress of the bad guy. The stress from the job should not be where it is right now and where it's been the last couple of years.
And that's the killer.
That's the killer. That's why they can't retain cops. Guys making $250,000 a year because of all the overtime, that can't sustain that financially or physically. They can't do that.
No.
It's just not fair. And that gets back to me with my dad and being a cop, family on the job, generations. We're burning the people out. You see executives leaving because they just want a life. They take other careers when a lot of us, I left on my own terms. And like I said, I got on, I was 20 years old. I had 35 years and a day. I took an extra day just to say I had one extra day. But I was 55 years old when I left. I still had plenty of time to stay. And I was in a civilian title. I could have stayed even longer. Look at Delatorre. He's in his mid-60s, and he's still there.
Resnick was like that for a long time, too.
And you talk about investigators. Joe Resnick and Sean O'Toole. Anything ever happened, those are the two people I'd want doing it. Consummate professionals and investigators.
There's your walkout.
Yep. And I had a great compliment from a still active 3-star chief. He said, Kevin, you had the most unusual walkout I've ever been to in my career. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, you had more community there than you had cops. And I had a lot of cops there, bosses. Yeah. But I had Harlem Mothers Save, the group of parents who've lost kids or their sons and daughters to gun violence. Jackie Rowe Adams. Coach Legree from Mo Better Football was there. I had community groups from all over the place. That was the best compliment I had, was when I saw the community that I worked for come out. And that's my granddaughter.
I was going to say, this is my favorite photo of your walkout. It's a cute, very cute one.
And from headquarters, which was not my last stop, we all took a caravan to the 9th precinct. and that's where it left.
Good place to end it. I'm going to get into the rapid fire on, this has been, again, a heck of a conversation. We're almost at 2 hours, so we've covered a lot of ground tonight, which I appreciate because you've had a career worth talking about for 2 hours. I don't even want to ask you because this was the first question of rapid fire, but I feel like you kind of answered it. So I'm going to skip it. It was going to be most rewarding role you had, but you pretty much answered that very articulately. So I'll skip over that one. Besides that one, second question to rapid fire. So we'll make it 4 questions tonight. One moment that defines your career, if you had to pick one.
With the kids, cop in Midtown North, 49th and 50th and 9th, 8:30 in the morning. I hear this kid screaming at the top of her lungs, a baby, like somebody's beating a child. I look up and there's this little 3-year-old crawling out a window onto a fire escape.
Ooh.
So those 2 guys I talked about, Steve O'Hagan, Johnny Rhoda, I get on the radio. I can't get in the front door. They lift me up to get to the fire escape. I was a lot lighter than I am now, and toss me up. I get onto the fire escape, probably why I got fire escape in the Bronx Juvenile Squad. And I go climbing up. They finally get in the door, and they break the door down from inside as I'm grabbing the child. As she, you know how a fire escape is, the ladder is on an angle, and there's on the angle. Yeah. She's falling through the hole as I'm going up the ladder. And by the grace of God, I reached out and grabbed her by the ankle, falling through the hole on the 4th floor, holding on to a fire escape that's now coming off the building. And there's my 2 partners in the window, grabbing the fire escape and pulling it. And we get the baby in, and we find out the mother had a heroin addiction and had locked the padlock on the outside of the door and forgot to close the window and left the baby home. But kids are my defining moment with the job. And I got cards from that girl's grandmother and her for many years. And I just saw the obituary that the grandmother passed away last year, this year, May. So, even 30 years later, I still remember that incident like yesterday.
Wherever that girl is, should you ever see this young woman, I hope you're doing well.
Her name is Christina, so I still remember her name. Christina. But I said, that's why God wanted me to be a cop. That little girl's alive today because of that.
Very nice. Another highlight of this program. Again, we talked about the programs that you've been able to impact and young people you've been able to impact. You've answered that pretty well. So I'll switch the question. You worked in a lot of cool assignments. You worked in a lot of cool units. If there was one unit you didn't work in over the course of your career that you would have liked to, looking back at it, what's one unit you could have seen yourself being in and really succeeding?
I think I didn't take the captain's test. Like I said, the way my life was going, I was happy being a lieutenant.
Yeah.
I would love to have been a precinct commander. I really, I just loved patrol. I loved the men and women in the precincts and the PSAs and the districts. But I would have loved to at least had that chance. I never took the chance because my career took me somewhere else. But I would have loved to have been a precinct commander when I was on patrol.
That would have been good.
Loved that opportunity because I think that's one of the toughest jobs in the city of New York.
Yeah, that would have been. I could see you. I mean, you had a platoon, so a step up from that would have been very good. I could see you. And I'm not just saying that because you're sitting here judging by the career you had and the respect so many people have for you. As I mentioned earlier with the promo I put out, I could see you being successful with that. Best advice back when you were starting out, 88, 89, that you got as a rookie?
Probably from my dad about knowing that you don't know who your friends are going to be. And that applied not only to that incident with the gun, but even walking a beat. I'd have people on the wall spread out. We don't do that anymore. By myself, on foot, drug dealing going on, and you'd stop somebody and do a pat down. And all of a sudden you'd hear the sirens, and one of the neighbors called 911, said, cop needs help. We didn't have cell phones, but then you realize, you go, no, I'm fine, Central, but the sector would still take a ride by to make sure you were okay. So knowing who your friends really are could be somebody in a window. And it kept me safe for 35 years.
Amen to that. And the last question, like I said, it's only 4 tonight because you covered the first one pretty well. It's only been a couple of years, but nevertheless, you had a hell of a run for those 35 years and a day, should we add. What do you miss most about the job when you look back?
The stuff going on in the Bronx right now, I would be neck deep in that. Whether it's the gang angle, the kid angle, the shooting angle, the investigative with the social media. I miss that. I do miss that getting into the thick of it. Little PTSD, I guess, over many years. But when I know I can bring something to the table, it's hard to watch that. But it's somebody else's turn right now. So, but I do miss that.
I can understand. This has been, again, a heck of a conversation. I really enjoyed it. Stick around. We'll talk off air. I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience. But before I do, as I always do, you know by now at the end of the show, if the guest has any shout outs, the floor is there. So if you got any shout outs, fire away, Commish.
So shout out to every single cop that's out there wearing the bag and the uniform. Keep doing what you're doing. We need you. It's a good job. Make it your job. Don't make it my job. Make it your job. And look at the brighter side of things. You're going to see and do things that nobody else in this world can do. The opportunity is there every single day. It's a matter of whether you want to take it or not. But the job can be very rewarding if you want it to be. And thank you. Stay safe.
Yes, couldn't have said that any better myself if I tried. So thank you very much. Like I said, we'll talk off air. Really glad we got the chance to link up on the show and talk. Thanks to everybody, as always. You know the drill by now. I appreciate all of you who tuned in, whether you watched on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or X/Twitter, whatever it is that you may call it, and those of you that'll listen later on. Coming up next in the Mike New podcast, I mistakenly rolled the Beat introduction tonight. This wasn't a Beat show. It was more of a generalized interview, but you will get the Beat profiles of police nationwide this Monday for what will be volume 19. Peter Ostrovsky, who was a customs agent back when customs was separate from Border Patrol in the 80s and 90s, investigated a lot of narcotics cases, both here at home, domestically, and of course abroad as well. 31 years in law enforcement ultimately. So very much looking forward to that conversation. And next Friday for what will be another volume of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. He had a big hand back when the FDNY and New York City EMS merged in the spring of 1996 in that transition, because he was involved in the transition team. So I'm going to get the layout on a merger that turns 30 years old next spring on what exactly went down behind the scenes with that from Bill Gross, who will join me for that volume. Again, Ostrovsky this Monday at 6. Bill Gross next Friday at 6 as well, barring anything unforeseen. Now, for those of you listening on the audio side, they originally recorded this when they were writing the My Generation album back in 1965. They didn't put out this song until 1968, and that is The Who tonight, coming your way with Magic Bus. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a great weekend. Stay safe.